The government takes tougher action against the French as anger builds over nuclear testing. Rupert Murdoch's big dollar deal to reshape and televise international rugby, and triumph for Australia in the first league test against the Kiwis.
From National 9 News, this is Nightline with Jim Waley.
Good evening. France has adopted a pose of frosty indifference towards Australia's move to recall our ambassador from Paris. Canberra's decision is part of a stronger stand over the resumption of nuclear testing in the South Pacific. The government's action, though, has not eased the pressure on Foreign Minister Gareth Evans, still accused of going soft on the French. And the ACTU is planning a mass rally against the tests on August the 6th, the anniversary of the Hiroshima bombing. Laurie Wilson has our report.
Nuclear testing's got to go!
In Sydney, demonstrators took to the streets to voice their protest against the French tests. But Foreign Minister Gareth Evans, who has presided over Australia's response, was also the target of their anger.
Export Evans, not uranium!
The Green Movement says Australia must take a more aggressive stand in opposing the tests.
We think it's disgusting, they should be made to stop, and our government should be leading the charge against them.
In Canberra, after a late-night cabinet meeting, the Prime Minister announced new protest action against France. Australia's ambassador to Paris will be recalled. All defence cooperation will be suspended, and there'll be severe restrictions on any military contracts. Even though the government stopped short of imposing trade sanctions, it seems certain that after being a front-runner, France now has no chance of winning the billion-dollar contract to supply new fighter aircraft to the RAAF.
We've upped the ante with a significantly tougher range of measures, deliberately designed to send a very direct message now to the French government and indeed the French people.
But the opposition says that only proves how inadequate Australia's initial response was.
He's now ratified just about everything that I put forward at the beginning of this week.
While the government and the opposition were busy talking tough, in Paris there was barely a response. French officials saying simply that France had taken note of Australia's actions.
Uranium! Export!
No doubt French diplomats also took note of the mounting public protests around the region. Hundreds of people marched in Brisbane. In New Zealand, demonstrators dumped rotting fish and garbage in the foyer of the French embassy in Wellington. And the Greenpeace yacht Rainbow Warrior is now in the Cook Islands. It will sail on to Mururoa in a bid to focus world attention on the nuclear tests. Laurie Wilson reporting for Nightline.
Rupert Murdoch's bid for rugby league supremacy may still be up in the air, but he's already turned his sights on rugby union. News Limited tonight unveiled a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars for a Southern Hemisphere Super Rugby competition between 12 teams from Australia, New Zealand and South Africa.
With the eyes of every rugby fan turned to South Africa for the World Cup, Rupert Murdoch has obviously recognised the potential of the code. In one of the biggest deals in sporting history, News Corporation will pay more than $550 million over the next 10 years to secure broadcast rights. From next year, New Zealand, South Africa and Australia will play an annual home and away series of 6 tests. And the Super 10 series will be radically overhauled, with 5 provincial teams from New Zealand, 4 from South Africa and 3 from Australia battling it out.
We've seen the 3 major unions in the Southern Hemisphere, Australia, South Africa and New Zealand, come together to develop what we perceive to be the perfect rugby product.
The rugby union such as Jason Little, Tim Horan and All Black Jonah Lomu from being poached by other wealthy codes. But in Johannesburg, representatives of the 3 unions gave terse replies when asked how much money the players will receive.
The players will not be paid to play rugby.
It's up to the national unions as to how they organise the distributions of funds.
You're preempting what will happen to the money, and those decisions have yet to be made by our respective unions.
The Australian Rugby League, which in the last few days met Super League officials, says it's surprised by the rugby deal. Chairman Ken Arthurson says it will have little impact on the domestic league competition.
I really don't think it's going to make any difference to us. Rugby league is easily the most dominant winter sport, along with AFL in this country.
One thing is for certain, with such large amounts of money involved, the amateur status of rugby union, at least in the Southern Hemisphere, cannot survive for long. Raymond Dale for Nightline.
Brisbane police are questioning a 42-year-old man about the murder of an elderly woman at her home in the southern suburb of Maruka. The body of 77-year-old Ethel Adamson was found by a Meals on Wheels volunteer yesterday. She'd suffered shocking injuries, including multiple fractures, a brain hemorrhage and broken ribs. A New South Wales police officer named in the state's Royal Commission into the service is being treated in hospital for a drug overdose. 42-year-old Sergeant Jeffrey Miser was found unconscious in his home after overdosing on sedatives. A King's Cross nightclub owner told the Commission yesterday that Sergeant Miser had accepted bribes. He was transferred out of the Cross earlier this year and had already been named several times in the Commission for allegedly taking protection money. Fire has destroyed a Melbourne timber factory that was about to start exporting its products overseas. The blaze caused more than $1 million damage. Firefighters could do little to stop the flames that were fuelled by timber stored inside. Boxing champion Jeff Fenech has been ordered to stay away for 2 years from his former de facto wife and her new partner. A Sydney court heard today how Fenech had allegedly threatened and harassed both of them.
Jeff Fenech didn't stay around the court long enough to see his former de facto wife today, but the proceedings went ahead anyway. Police prosecutor Sergeant Andrew McColm said Miss Tanya Foster was so afraid of Fenech, she wanted a restraining order to stop him harassing her and her de facto husband, policeman Charlie Saab. Sergeant McComb said Miss Foster had gone to police for protection 4 days ago. She said the boxing champion had repeatedly threatened her and Saab and seemed determined to make her new husband fight him. Miss Foster told police the harassment had begun last week when Fenech kept ringing her at home. In one call, Fenech allegedly said to Saab, "Hey Charlie, listen, if you have anything to say it to me, because I'll be around to smash your face in." The prosecution said Fenech later confronted Miss Foster as she was picking up their son at school. Fenech then drove to a nearby TAB and cornered Saab, saying, "Listen here, you dog,